everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy A13 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, this particular phone is very interesting because these devices are not that expensive at all. They're supposed to be, Samsung's cheapest foray into the whole entire Samsung lineup, and there are lots of cool little advantages with these types of devices. Like, they're not really they're not as bad as you probably would suspect, but they are pretty, they're supposed to be the cheapest phones, so they're not bad for the price. But when you compare them to the Galaxy S24s or something, it's a completely different story. So just keep that in mind in the back of your head. But I will tell you, I like the Samsung Galaxy A series, and even their A13 series I actually like a lot too. They're fairly decent phones for the most part, and I do think that's a really cool thing going on for these particular devices. So from that side, if you want to pick up some phones I would probably recommend buying this year though, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy A13, on the front of this particular phone, we do have a 6.6-inch PLS LCD panel on the front of it. It's full HD and it looks pretty good. It's a pretty good looking panel. It gets fairly bright, not that bright, but it's a good looking panel. 60 Hz, so it's not a 90 or 120 Hz, only 60 Hz on this panel. And it's kind of like that Infinity V display. So you have a little bit of bezel around it with the bottom bezel a little bit, but it's really not that big of a deal. And it's overall a decent looking phone when you remember this thing was as cheap as it is. I was able to buy mine for I don't even remember, $50, probably even cheaper than that on Amazon, on eBay. It was in fairly decent condition and it's still kind of working, kind of maybe has a scratch or two or crack or something, but it's totally fine for the most part. So these things are very cheap and you can get them for pennies on the dollar nowadays. So very, very cheap phone. Now for the rest of the body, it's pretty much built out of plastic. So it feels pretty much as you probably suspect. It's a very cheap feeling phone, so keep that in mind. On the port selection though, it's very interesting. You do have a USB Type-C port on this particular phone, which is really cool. You have a speaker grill, and you also have a headphone jack as well. There's not a lot of phones that were made in 2022 that have headphone jacks, but this is one of those devices, which is genuinely very cool. To have that type of capability is awesome, and I love having that on this type of phone. On top of that, you're also getting a micro SD card slot inside of the Samsung Galaxy A13 as well. So that's another super cool thing going on for this particular phone. And if you were in the market and if you wanted a device that was giving you a better type of, I/O, I guess, this phone is actually giving you. So this right there in and of itself, again, is another super cool thing going on for this particular device. And it's something I love a lot. And if I'm buying some sort of phone, it's definitely a really cool thing going on with this particular phone. So from that particular side on the I/O selection, that kind of covers it up there. On the back side, it's pretty much built out of plastic. You're kind of getting this triple camera setup, actually kind of like a quadruple camera setup, but it's not really. It's kind of a funny thing they kind of threw in here, but I guess it kind of gets the job done. We'll talk about that in a second. It's a plastic back, so there's not really too much else going on. And I will tell you, it has a big battery inside of it, 5,000 milliamp hours, but it's pretty much, there's no wireless charging or reverse wireless charging. It is pretty much what you'd expect from a very cheap phone. It looks more expensive than it probably does, or it is, but it looks like it will perform better than it probably does, if that makes any sense. So keep that in mind, but beyond that, I think it's still a very, very decent phone for the price tag. And I do think Samsung makes some really good, A series, they're cheap phones. Like I said, I was able to buy this thing for less than $50 or around $50. And this is a 2022 phone. It's really not that bad. So with those types of devices, it's a pretty crazy thing. But with that being said, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. Now, in terms of the camera side of things, like I said, kind of like a quadruple camera setup. You're getting a 50 megapixel wide, a 5 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, and then a 2 megapixel depth lens. There's a lot of things to kind of keep in mind here with this particular device. The first thing I'll probably tell you is, it's really not the best camera of all time. And that is kind of what's going on when you're getting this type of, phone. There's really not much else to say. This is a pretty outdated type of device when it kind of comes down to it from a camera lens. You're getting 1080p on the front and the back, which again is kind of outdated, again, when it kind of comes down to it. If you're wanting a device that is basically going to be giving you a better type of camera, any series above this is probably going to be giving you that. With this one, it is kind of a little bit of outdated camera. So that's kind of just a big thing to kind of keep in mind here. But beyond that, what I would definitely tell you is it gets the job done. If you need to go and take some photos here and there, it can get the job done for sure. But if you're trying to go through and get really nice photos or take really nice photos or anything like that, this phone probably just isn't going to be able to give you that type of capability. And that's kind of the problem. It's if you're wanting the better phone, that's kind of what the issue is. So I will tell you in a lot of ways, it's still a good phone in, some ways. The camera just really isn't that great. Again, it appears better than it really probably is. with the lack of 4K, it's kind of like that's like in a pretty outdated lens. I'm glad it has an ultra-wide camera, but beyond that, it's really not going to be giving you that great of an experience, and that's just kind of what's happening when you're getting this type of device. So from that level, that kind of covers it up here as well. Now, on top of that, another big thing here is with its software. So it started off on Android 12, it was upgradable to Android 13, and then that's kind of it. It kind of stopped in Android 13. So this is kind of what I'll tell you from that perspective. Like if you're getting a device like this, just know that it's going to be kind of an outdated camera or an outdated software too. Not only an outdated camera, but also an outdated software as well. And that is kind of the issue that you're getting when you're getting these types of devices. Like you're getting phones and softwares that are just outdated, and that is essentially the problem. I would 100% recommend more so if you go ahead and buy a phone that does give you better software, better experience overall. And with this type of device, that's kind of what's going on here. I will tell you with this type of phone, there's a lot to love here. There's a lot to, be appreciative of. The software with One UI is great, but it's just not really getting supported with software anymore. So it's just going to have to come down to you whether you think having this type of software experience is important to you or not. There could be a choice and a chance where you look at this phone and you're like, oh, I want a phone that has more software, has better software experience or something like that. And that could very well end up happening here. But I would tell you for the most part, it's still a very good performing, very good feeling phone. And I'll tell you from the software side, there's still like some features that are still being, given to this thing. So just keep that in mind. But beyond that, there's really not much else going on here for the most part. So that kind of covers it up here. Now beyond that, there's really not a lot of other craziness going on here. The performance is pretty much what you'd expect. I mean, it's an Exynos 850 chipset with 3 or 4 or 6 gigabytes of RAM. So the RAM is kind of all over the place here. Like you are getting a very, once again, it's a very limited performing type of phone. A lot of the games and apps can still pretty much work as what you'd expect. But if you are trying to go through and go up and play like very intensive games or, go up and do something else super intense, you might be getting a little bit of a different, weirder experience with this type of device. And once again, that's just kind of what happens when you're getting these types of phones. You're just going to be getting kind of it's a limited type of phone because it is kind of outdated. So that's just kind of what happens here. Once again, if you're getting this type of phone, you kind of know what you're getting into. It is a very, slow performing phone for the most part. But if you're trying to just use it for just, basic stuff, you could probably get around with just using it for the most basic stuff. You're probably going to be okay. But like I said, if you are taking it up a notch, and if you are trying to play super intensive stuff, there might be some problems that you're going to run into, especially if you get that 3 gigabyte of RAM option. So keep that in mind as well. But for the most part, that kind of covers it up there too. And to be honest, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot to like about this phone, but there's also some things to dislike about this device as well. And there are some things that I look, at this phone about, and I'm like, I feel like they could probably be doing a better job. But this phone came out in 2022. There's already 2 successors to this thing. So this thing is not supposed to be like this big replacement of the Galaxy S series. It's supposed to be the cheapest entry point or one of the cheapest entry points to the Samsung Galaxy phones. And I think they did a decent job. I think there's actually a lot to like here. And I do think that's a very cool thing going on for this particular device. Again, it's not perfect, but if you're just wanting a cheap phone to kind of get into the ecosystem, this is actually not that bad of a choice. And I do think that in and of itself is a very cool thing going on for this particular phone. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.